I had always believed that marriage was a partnership built on mutual respect. My name is Daniel, and for the past 7 years, my life had revolved around maintaining balance between work, family, and my relationship with my wife, Emily. She was smart, quick-witted, and had this charm that drew people in effortlessly. I, on the other hand, had always been the calm, grounded one, the type who solved problems quietly, who observed before reacting, who preferred a rational conversation over any emotional outburst. For the first few years, things had been fine. We laughed, shared weekend plans, and had our fair share of disagreements, but they always ended with a compromise. I thought that trust was the strongest currency in a marriage, and I had given it all to her. I had never questioned her actions, her words, or her intentions. I thought that my calm demeanor, my reliability, and my quiet support were more than enough to maintain the bond we had formed. Then came the day that shifted everything. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, nor was it an obvious betrayal. It was something much subtler, something that quietly eroded the foundation I had so carefully built. Emily demanded an apology from me. The words came sharply, unexpectedly, almost like a slap in the face. "You owe me an apology, Daniel," she said, her voice firm yet tinged with disbelief, as though she couldn't fathom that I might resist her command. I paused, looking at her across the kitchen table. She had always had a way of making her expectations feel non-negotiable, a quiet authority that seemed to demand compliance. But in that moment I realized something fundamental about our marriage. Respect wasn't just about what you gave. It was about what you allowed yourself to accept. The request itself wasn't even about the incident, it was about power. She wanted control. She wanted to see me bend, to see me acknowledge wrongdoing even when none existed. My mind raced through every conversation, every disagreement, every silent compromise we had made over the years. Was this the pattern I had missed all along? That the moments I had chosen peace were being mistaken for submission? That my patience had been a weakness rather than a strength? I could feel the tension between us tighten, but I remained still. I didn't argue. I didn't try to reason with her. I simply considered my options. Apologizing would have been easy, words are easy to give, but at what cost? Every word of forced submission would have chipped away at the part of me that still valued my dignity. And once dignity is surrendered, it's almost impossible to reclaim. Emily's eyes narrowed, sensing the hesitation, expecting the compliance she was used to. That expectation was the final clue I needed. She was shocked, absolutely shocked, when I did nothing. My silence wasn't just quiet, it was deliberate. It was a signal that the rules she thought applied to me no longer did. I was no longer playing by the script she had written for our marriage. For a long moment the room felt suspended, the air thick with unspoken tension. I could see the disbelief in her face, the flicker of panic, the momentary crack in her otherwise confident facade. And then, as calmly as I could, I made my decision. I stood up from the table. I didn't speak a word as I walked past her. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from anger, but from the clarity that had settled in my chest. I wasn't leaving out of spite or impulsive frustration. I was leaving because I finally understood what I had been ignoring for far too long. The apology she demanded wasn't about reconciliation. It was about asserting dominance. And I wasn't willing to give her that satisfaction, not anymore. I gathered my jacket from the coat rack, my movements deliberate, controlled. Emily stood frozen, her lips parted, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. That was when I realized just how long I had been suppressing my own voice, how long I had been bending and compromising simply to maintain a semblance of harmony. But harmony without respect was nothing more than silence in a cage. The drive away from our house was quiet, the streets empty in the early evening. I didn't call a friend, didn't stop for coffee, didn't try to distract myself. I allowed my thoughts to flow freely, unfiltered. I replayed years of minor incidents, the moments when she subtly dismissed my feelings, the subtle undermining disguised as jokes, the countless times I had swallowed my own frustration to avoid confrontation. They had added up, each one small and almost imperceptible, until they formed a weight that I could no longer bear. It wasn't a single event that caused this breaking point. It was everything. It was the subtle erosion of mutual respect, the quiet power struggles masked as everyday life, the constant feeling that my worth was measured not by my actions or intentions, but by how much I was willing to yield. As I parked the car near the quiet park I had always loved, I realized the weight of my decision was not only about leaving the room, the house, or the neighborhood. It was about reclaiming my own life. I wasn't angry at her. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was simply choosing myself for the first time in years. When I returned home later that night, Emily was still sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes wide, her usual confident demeanor replaced by unease. She didn't know what to say. There was no apology offered, no attempt at negotiation, no plea for explanation. The power dynamics had shifted, and for the first time she felt it. She was forced to confront a reality she hadn't anticipated. That I was no longer going to participate in her attempts to control me. Her shock was palpable, but I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My actions spoke louder than words ever could. By walking away calmly, by refusing to comply with a demand that violated my sense of self-respect, I had demonstrated more strength in those few moments than any argument or lecture could have conveyed. The quiet continued between us, tense and loaded, but it was no longer one-sided. For the first time, the silence belonged to me as much as it did to her. I could feel it like a steady pulse, a reminder that I was no longer confined by the expectations of someone else's ego. And as I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter, I understood that sometimes the simplest, most measured actions carry the heaviest consequences. The next morning, Emily approached me, her steps hesitant, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "Daniel, I just wanted to talk," she said, carefully choosing each word as if afraid they might shatter the fragile balance between us. I looked at her, calm and measured, and realized something fundamental. The apology she had demanded yesterday was never about fixing anything. It was about testing how far she could push me, and she had miscalculated. I didn't respond immediately. I let her words hang in the air, heavy and unclaimed. The silence was not cruel, it was deliberate. She shifted nervously, glancing down at the floor, suddenly aware that the man she thought would always yield had chosen a different path. "You don't understand," she continued, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. Her voice trailed off, and I realized she had no idea how to articulate the imbalance she had created. She had assumed I would apologize, that I would validate her authority, and that she could continue to operate as she always had. But the script she had been following for years no longer applied. I finally spoke, my voice calm, steady, unshakable. "Emily, I have never refused to take responsibility for my actions. But an apology is meaningful only when it is earned, not demanded. What you asked for yesterday was neither fair nor justified." I watched her face, noting the shift from confusion to a dawning realization. Shock had given way to comprehension. She had underestimated the cost of violating the boundaries of respect. For a long moment we stood there, neither of us moving, the air thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Then I made my choice. "I can't continue like this," I said, each word deliberate. "I won't compromise my dignity for the illusion of peace." And with that, I turned and walked away, calmly closing the door behind me, leaving her to confront the consequences of her expectations alone. The days that followed were quiet, introspective. Emily didn't call, didn't text, didn't attempt to negotiate. The shock she had felt in those initial moments lingered, growing into a deeper understanding of what she had lost. And while I didn't seek revenge or attempt to make her regret, I could see the impact of my actions. My quiet, unwavering decision had shifted the dynamic completely. She had expected drama, confrontation, or submission. Instead, I had given her none of those things, only the clarity that I would no longer compromise myself for the sake of compliance. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding the sense of self I had allowed to erode over time. I spent evenings on long walks, reflecting on the past, and reclaiming the confidence that had quietly slipped away in small moments of compromise. I reconnected with old friends, pursued projects that had been put aside, and allowed myself to experience life without the constant shadow of obligation to someone else's ego. Emily eventually reached out, her tone tentative, almost apologetic, but I remained measured. I listened, acknowledged her words, but I did not step back into the old dynamic. The lesson had been learned, not through shouting, not through confrontation, but through the quiet, deliberate choice to stand firm in one's own dignity. Walking away had not been easy, but it had been necessary. And in that quiet, deliberate decision, I discovered a freedom I hadn't felt in years, the understanding that respect is earned, boundaries must be upheld, and true partnership is never dictated by fear or obligation.